Thanks everyone for joining us today. We're going to talk about how you can leverage a document management system to protect your data. As Karen mentioned, my name is Ron Warman. I am a partner in the document management team at Affinity, and I primarily work with NetDocuments as an enterprise document management system. So as we talk today, a lot of what I talk about will be focused around that platform. So let's start off by saying, what does it mean to protect your data? So as firms, as organizations, oftentimes we are storing client intellectual property or other confidential information. I know firms that are hosting and storing recipes and things of that nature. Maybe it's highly sensitive agreements and contracts. Maybe do matrimonial law, and we have prenuptial agreements or some sort of contracts where we're trying to keep any sort of mergers and things quiet until they occur. Personal information. Obviously, this is a hot topic there with protecting individuals and their data. And then lastly, but not least, is your firm's reputation. As law firms, the biggest thing that we can do is maintain our reputation, because that's what clients look to us for, our expertise, our professionalism, our ability to help and advise them. And so, when we're protecting the data that we host, obviously we're protecting our reputation as well. And we talk about reputation, you don't have to search far, and you don't have to go back too far back to find some recent instances of data breaches. A few on the screen I have right here. A couple of these are just within the last month, once from last December with Microsoft, but situations where law firms have had their data exposed, and in one case published online. And the other thing I highlight here is that historically speaking, when we talk about document management systems, there was a point in time where the release of the 3-tier document management system was a pretty important move. And what that meant was that for on-prem systems, the end user no longer connected directly to the data. They connected to a middle tier application server, and that kind of proxied their connection, which created another layer of protection. But what we're seeing now is that some of these vulnerabilities and these hacking attempts are becoming more elaborate, and they're taking advantage of an environment where maybe there's a 3-tier, that middle tier, but there's still some sort of Windows file share or something in place, and they're finding ways around that to access your data, to encrypt it, and to basically hijack that and to use that against you. And so when we talk about things like NetDocuments and a true SaaS DMS platform, there's that extra layer of protection where the data is now removed from your environment, and we're working within their cloud infrastructure, and we're using their proprietary storage platforms and things, and reducing a lot of that exposure that we otherwise would have, even in an on-prem 3-tier model. So, but again, you'll even notice here an example where Microsoft had a security breach back in December. And one of the things I included that for is just to highlight the fact that it's not always the technology. Oftentimes it could be just the user error. And in this case, it was a case of a misconfiguration on one of their databases that exposed some customer data. So keep that in mind when we're worried about protecting our data. So what are some of the considerations? For starters, it's about centralizing that data and unifying it into as few locations as possible so that it can be governed. Applying appropriate security within your organization. Securing obviously from outside influences, intruders, hackers, things like that. Protecting people from themselves and their own potential mistakes, whether intentional or not. And then meeting and exceeding client requirements. I know basically all law firms are facing client audits where they're needing to document and display how they're protecting the data. And lastly, with all of this, your data still needs to be accessible for your folks to get their work done. And so that's what's important. You have to find that right balance of security, but also the ability to actually get work done. And so, an example here, and obviously coronavirus is a very hot topic right now. And here's an example of a large law firm closing all 22 of their physical offices and having all of their employees go to working remotely. And the data still needs to be available in that case. And so as we're talking through this, it's not just about protecting your data, but still making it available so that people can have a workable situation. All right, well, let's start with talking about centralizing that data. So the first question is, how many places are you saving content today? Network drives, local computer, within your email, cloud storage platforms like Dropbox, OneDrive, or wherever else it might be. And so all those different locations just simply complicate the management of that data. How are you managing access? Historically speaking, firms were pretty much of the mindset that we would leave our data public unless there was a specific security need to lock it down further. And more we're seeing folks move towards that closed security model of wanting to lock things down by default and only opening up access as is required. And then also applying ethical walls. And so as we're trying to manage the access when an ethical wall is required, how are we dealing with all the data where it resides today? How are we identifying which matter it's for? And how are we applying any sort of walls and security that we need to? And then the last piece is performing retention. So a big part of protecting our data is not holding on to data too long that we don't need to. And so it's a matter of how do we perform retention of that data? And again, going back to how many places is it? How is it tagged to understand what it's related to? And then how are we executing that retention? So let's talk a little bit about some of the features that help us do this. And again, a lot of my focus will be on some examples here from NetDocuments, being that that's what I work with every day. And so the first concept we talk about is invisible DMS. And so we showed those different locations we save things to, your network drives, your local computer, your email, and those cloud storage providers. And so one of the things about a document management platform is the idea that we're not trying to make everyone work the same way. We know people work differently, but we're trying to meet them where they work and bringing them into the system and accessing the same data through different interfaces. So you'll see here examples where one user could be working through Windows Explorer, just like they would with a network drive and accessing their content. Another user can be working within their email system, filing content within there, accessing it right within Outlook while they're navigating through their email. And the third example is just showing that the document management system can be available from within the Office suite or other applications. So when I'm opening and saving, NetDocuments is right there. It's easy to access. It's where I'm doing the work that I'm doing, and it makes it easy for the user to get to it and interact with it. Okay. The second item here, we talk about integrated collaboration. So document management systems are primarily developed because they want you to collaborate, work on documents with your colleagues, go back and version back and forth, run comparisons. Now we're getting to the point though where collaboration needs to go beyond that. And collaboration means we need to bring in our clients to directly work with us, or outside counsel or experts, or whatever that might be, but basically opening up collaboration outside of just our firm. And so with a platform like NetDocuments, you can see they've introduced features like collab spaces and threads. And so the idea here is that I'm now opening up collaboration, but it's still within the NetDocuments platform. It still is inheriting that same security and all of the other capabilities we have within the platform, but now just making it easier to collaborate. So you can see here, collab spaces and threads are just two examples. And I highlight threads because threads is very important as an idea that I don't necessarily have to correspond back and forth in email and have that exposed to be able to go back and forth and comment on things. I can be right within the NetDocuments platform, and I could be conversing back and forth with these threads about information about the case, the matter, a document, whatever it might be, and all of that is contained again within the NetDocuments platform, secured, maintained, and any sort of retention policies applied based off of that. So powerful collaboration there. The third item is access controls. So if we go back to talking about all those different places we save content, how do we secure that content? And so within NetDocuments, obviously you're basically coming down to a single platform potentially, but also the ease of use with the user interface and be able to find users and groups and apply access without having to search through an Active Directory structure or somehow figure out within Dropbox or OneDrive or whatever the other system might be to share content or open up my mailbox or anything like that. So again, putting all that content into a single enterprise document management system like NetDocuments and be able to leverage the powerful yet simple access controls that are available to us. And then native retention. So another example here where within the same platform, we've got the functionality to apply and enforce any retention that we would need. And so in this case, just showing an example where a matter that might be closed beyond 7 years would adhere to a retention policy of deleting that content. And so natively speaking within NetDocuments, we can create that retention policy and we can have it run automatically, generate reports for our administrators, but keeping us on top of that data and not holding on to data longer than we need to. So the concept again of native retention. Okay, so let's talk about securing within the organization. And again, as I mentioned, historically speaking, a lot of firms would just say, keep it simple, leave everything public, and as we need to apply security, we'll deal with those individual cases. And now it's coming back more and more to saying, you know what, that's more of a risky approach, and we need to take a more conservative approach of saying, well, let's be more secure to start, and as we need to, we can open up access to other folks. And so you can see here with this closed security model, in NetDocuments, I've got an example showing that with every intellectual property matter and workspace, we can then say only the intellectual property group has access to it. And I don't have to necessarily open that up to litigation, real estate, or any other groups that doesn't need that access. Now, if I have the case where I do need it, I could of course include those groups. But this goes back to that closed security model. And some firms will go as far as saying, I'm going to have things like matter teams. And so narrowing it down even further than the practice group and saying, I'm going to have a matter team that's going to have access. And you can still, at the user level, let them grant access to others and collaborate within that. But as a starting point, keep it secure and not expose it more than it needs to. The next item, going back to the concept of ethical walls, again, you can see an example here where this is more of kind of that open model with just having kind of open access, but the corporate group is being denied access in this case. And so maybe the corporate group is working on one or more matters that are of a conflict, and we need to isolate them from this matter in particular. And so we can apply that ethical wall. And so it could be inclusionary walls, exclusionary walls, contractor walls, whatever it might be. But again, that powerful yet flexible and simple ability to apply security to the content. And again, this is all about not exposing data beyond where it needs to be exposed. And whether or not it's because somebody's malicious and trying to find something, or they accidentally stumble across something and see something they shouldn't have seen, and it could be either one of those cases, but just not exposing it beyond what you really need to get your work done. Okay, let's talk about securing it from intruders. Okay, so for starters, when we talk about the fact that we're looking at a SaaS platform like NetDocuments, it's obviously something that's running within the cloud. And so you have that immediate question of, well, now am I exposing myself? Because when I'm on-prem, I'm within my own network, within my own data centers, I feel like I have more control there of what I allow into my network. And so as soon as I move out to a system where it's cloud-based, now I'm worried about controlling access and it potentially being more vulnerable. But NetDocuments has capability with what they call federated identity to leverage your single sign-on platform to have a more sophisticated, validated authentication mechanism. So we're basically ensuring that the person logging in is who we expect it to be, and we're not susceptible to simply having brute force user ID and password attacks. And that federated identity approach can also lead to not only the single sign-on, but you can layer other things on top of that in terms of your controls like multi-factor authentication. And so you can then enforce some sort of cell phone or key fobs or whatever that might be, but adding layers of authentication onto that to, again, assure that the people authenticating are who you expect it to be, and it's not someone outside your organization. The next area is you can actually enforce IP address requirements. And so obviously, one aspect of running a cloud-based system is that it opens it up to anywhere where you can get online. But there's also the concern that once I do that, am I, again, opening that up to folks? So I can go as far as saying, I want to restrict access to just my organization. And to do that, I can say, well, if it's coming from my IP addresses from our offices, or potentially even via the VPN connections that our users will make when they're traveling to connect back to the office, I will permit all of those connections to my NetDocuments repository. And so you have the flexibility within NetDocuments to enforce that type of requirement. And what this does is it goes another layer of protecting you to say, now I'm enforcing that I am actually only allowing users with firm equipment to connect to the data. And so I'm not necessarily allowing them to connect from a home PC, a personal PC, a kiosk, or anything else. They're going to connect from a machine, a computer that we own, we control, we apply security to, we have antivirus on it, we do encryption of the drives and things like that. So again, it's putting all those controls in place to allow the folks to work and to potentially travel, but to also have the security and the management that you would require there. Okay. And then the next topic here, protecting people from themselves. And so whether intentional or not, whether they're being malicious or they're naive and don't understand what they're doing, worrying about end users and how they might expose their data. And so obviously we have things like the security controls that we've talked about previously, but there's also the concept now with NetDocuments with DLP, data loss protection. And so the idea here is that we can have policies that are defined on a matter that says, this person can have access to this content. They can view it, they might be able to edit it, but we won't allow them to perform certain actions. And so in this case, this screenshot is just demonstrating the user attempted to compose an email and to attach these documents, and certain documents within that set basically violate the DLP policy for whether or not that content can be shared outside the organization. And so that DLP policy doesn't have to necessarily be something that the end user knows and memorizes all the policies that are out there. it's being enforced for them. So as they go and attempt to do something, it stops them and allows them to go on and basically continue to do their activities, but understand that that's not something they can do. They cannot share this via email. Okay, but those policies go beyond just the simple example, but the idea that we can have other controls that are still allowing our folks to get their work done, to work with the data, but not potentially expose it outside of the system. Okay. And before we talked about the fact, we gave some examples there where someone's been impacted by a virus, by malware, a crypto locker type event where their data has now been encrypted and held hostage. And so we talked about NetDocuments also being able to meet you where you work and exposing the data through Windows Explorer. And obviously that opens up the vulnerability to say, well, isn't that data also going to be susceptible to that type of activity? But what NetDocuments includes is they include the circuit breaker concept. And this is technology where you're able to define if there's a certain amount of activity in a certain time frame that will be reported as suspicious. It will stop any sort of data being synchronized back to the platform, and that device has basically become unusable at that point, so that you can act on it and take action appropriately. And there are other things that are in place as well to protect your data in terms of backups and recovery and things, and preventing it from exposing more than just the documents that have been touched. But this is a nice feature from the end user where I continue to allow them to work and see content locally as if they're working within on your local drives, but protect that content from that sort of exposure as well. Okay. All right. The next point here is just meeting and exceeding client requirements. And so we talk about the fact that as firms, we face audits from our customers, our clients, and they're demanding that we are doing things like two-factor authentication or encryption at rest, or maybe even doing something broad, more controlling of their data and saying every matter that is for our firm, we want you to lock that down to a predefined list of users, and when the matter is closed, we want you to remove access from those folks as well. And so you need to kind of meet those requirements. Now, when it comes time for the actual security side of things and the certifications, you can see here that NetDocuments is an industry leader in having those certifications. And so a few points that I'll make here. One, as a law firm, what you're best at is practicing law. And to achieve the level of certifications that NetDocuments has achieved, the time, the talent, and the money that would go into that is likely something that's just not worth your investment. You leave a security company to do the security while you continue to practice law. And so by subscribing to something like NetDocuments, you inherit all of the certifications that they've achieved without having to make that same investment in building out that platform yourself. And the other thing I'll highlight here is this is not just data center certifications. This is platform certification. So talking about the data center, the application set, their internal staff policies in terms of which roles can have access to which systems and how all that works together. And you can see that they're continuing to push forward with additional certifications, and the list evolves every year and continues to grow, and they stay on top of that. So, but as a firm, for me, it's the value of inheritance to say, by using this, when I go and fill out these surveys, there are certain areas where I can just basically say, here is all of my documentation that NetDocuments has provided. I can just pass that along, and that achieves certain levels for me, and then I can limit my scope that I'm worried about to other areas. Okay. And the last point that we were making here is obviously your data still needs to be accessible, right? And so we talk about the fact that NetDocuments will meet you where you work when you're working on your computer, within your email, within Windows Explorer, obviously within the web browser interface and things like that in the Microsoft Office suite. But this goes beyond that as well. It's basically saying that I can then also have mobile access from my iPad, my iPhone, my Android devices, and others to basically get into the same NetDocuments platform. I am still basically leveraging the same security, the same authentication mechanisms and things like that, but now providing users with access from their devices. And again, typically speaking, it's you have that balance of whether you allow personal devices versus managed devices and those sorts of controls to be in place, but you're now giving that mobile access to your users so that wherever they're traveling from, they now have access. And so the other point being is that I can use things like the Microsoft Office 365 web apps, Office Online. And so maybe I'm no longer deploying the full Microsoft suite to our laptops, and I want users to use the web apps because it's easier for maintaining those systems. And NetDocuments has that integration that basically allows you to then say, I'm going to open my documents within the online apps. I'm going to compose and craft and edit them, and all that without even having a local installation of the Office suite. And so again, this goes back to the fact that we are still using the NetDocuments platform. We are still leveraging the security and controls and things that are in place with that. All the data is basically in that one governed system, but we're allowing our users to work where they need to work from, how they need to work, to continue to allow them to get things done while still getting those controls in place. And obviously, nowadays, especially with the situation we have with coronavirus, this is a hot topic for firms because they're talking about, I've got to be prepared to allow people to work outside of the office. And we have firms that are doing events of basically closing one of their offices and forcing the entire office to work from home and testing out their VPN capabilities, their Citrix platforms and other things. But basically making sure that their users know how to work remotely, how to access the data, and how to work from it. But with a system like NetDocuments, the capabilities are already there. It's basically been designed that way from the very beginning, and it allows you to basically get the security, get the controls, get the governance you need, while still getting all the functionality that your users need to get their job done. Okay. So at this point, I want to open it up for any questions you have, if any. I will highlight the fact that if this topic and other document management or document type items are of interest to you, we do have 2 podcasts that you can check out. We've got one called Docs on the Rocks, that's done by our document management team. And we also have one that's been out there for a bit longer, Docs After Dark, from the experts from our document automation team. So there's a lot of good content out there that you can check out if it's of interest to you. So Karen, I'm gonna pass it back to you, see if there are any questions and let you take it from there.
Great. And I do not have any questions. Of course, if you would like to send those in, jump into the chat window now, and I'm sure Ron would be happy to answer those. But thank you, Ron. It's just such important information right now. So thank you for sharing it with us. Great job.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for attending. If you were intrigued by Ron's presentation this afternoon and want to learn more, I encourage you to take advantage of our free 30-minute consultation. This is your chance to speak with one of our DMS experts at Affinity and get those nagging questions answered. Just reply to the follow-up email I'm about to send and I'll do the rest. We have more DMS focused sessions coming soon, actually. In April, our Director of Document Management for Affinity, Greg Bray, will be joining us along with one of our senior consultants to explore imaging solutions for document management. I'll include links to find out more about those sessions in my follow-up email too, or you can jump onto affinityconsulting.com/webinars for all the details. Please do share your feedback with us on the survey that follows. Join us again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.